The Westfield Shopping Center had always been my sanctuary after the chaos of another demanding day at the law firm. There's something deeply comforting about the orchestrated buzz of conversations echoing off polished floors, the rich aroma of cinnamon rolls drifting from the bakery, and the warm glow emanating from countless storefront windows. It creates an atmosphere that allows my shoulders to finally drop, my breathing to steady, my mind to quiet. That particular Thursday afternoon in late September, I walked through the glass doors with an unusual lightness in my step, a sense of purpose that felt almost ceremonial. My mission was crystal clear and deeply personal: find the perfect birthday gift for my mother, Alina. Not just any generic present that screams last-minute desperation, but something truly thoughtful, something that would capture the essence of our relationship and make her eyes crinkle with that particular joy she reserves for moments that touch her heart. These small rituals of care and attention have always anchored me. They serve as gentle reminders that, even when the world feels chaotic and unpredictable, there are still pieces of life I can shape with intention and love. I made my way to Café Luna, the intimate little coffee shop nestled between the bookstore and the jewelry boutique, its warm wooden interior and mismatched vintage furniture creating an oasis of calm in the mall's polished uniformity. The barista, a young woman with intricate braids and paint-stained fingers, smiled as I approached the counter. "The usual Mrs. Richardson?" she asked, already reaching for the espresso machine. "Please, Maria, and make it extra foam today," I replied, fishing my wallet from my purse. The first sip of my cappuccino was pure comfort, the velvety foam brushing against my lips like a small luxury I'd earned through another successful day of managing difficult clients and impossible deadlines. I settled into my favorite spot by the floor-to-ceiling windows, watching the human theater unfold before me. Teenagers clustered around phone screens, their laughter infectious and genuine. Young mothers navigated strollers through the crowd with practiced efficiency while juggling shopping bags and pacifiers. An elderly couple sat on a nearby bench, sharing a soft pretzel and pointing at window displays with the comfortable intimacy that comes from decades together. I couldn't help but smile, feeling like both observer and participant in this larger rhythm of human connection. For those precious 20 minutes, I existed in my own protected bubble, watching life flow around me while feeling perfectly, completely at peace. The stress of the morning's depositions melted away. The pressure of next week's trial preparation became a distant concern. In that moment, life felt exactly as it should be: manageable, predictable, mine to control. After finishing my coffee and selecting a beautiful silk scarf for my mother at Nordstrom, deep burgundy with gold threads that would complement her olive complexion perfectly, I headed toward the parking garage with that particular satisfaction that comes from a task completed with care. The gift bag swung gently from my hand, its tissue paper rustling softly with each step. The underground garage was cooler than the September evening outside, carrying that distinctive blend of concrete, exhaust, and the faint metallic scent that always reminds me of rain on asphalt. I found myself humming Blue Moon, an old jazz standard I'd heard on the radio during my drive over, my voice echoing softly off the concrete walls. Everything felt light, almost magical. The kind of evening where small pleasures align to create a perfect moment, where you're acutely aware of your own contentment. But then I turned the corner toward my usual parking section, and my breath caught in my throat like a fish hook. There, just 3 rows away, sat a car I knew with painful intimacy. Marcus's midnight blue BMW with its distinctive scratch along the passenger door, a battle scar from our move to the new house 2 years ago when the moving truck got too close. At first, my mind scrambled for alternative explanations. There are thousands of BMWs in Seattle, I told myself, even though I could identify that particular vehicle from 2 blocks away. The rational part of my brain offered reasonable scenarios. Maybe he'd finished his client meetings early, maybe he'd stopped to pick up something for dinner, maybe the car wasn't even his despite the distinctive Nevada license plate that read, Lawman 1. His choice, not mine. My pace slowed involuntarily, my heart beginning to tap an irregular rhythm against my ribs. What were the odds Marcus would be here? He'd been working late every night for the past month, drowning in preparation for what he called the biggest case of his career. Patent litigation that required long hours, weekend research, and constant client consultations that kept him at the office until well past 9 most nights, or so he'd told me. I shook my head, trying to dislodge the sudden rush of unease that was threatening to contaminate my perfect afternoon. I wanted desperately to preserve the calm I'd cultivated at Cafe Luna, to hold onto that sense of everything being exactly right. I clutched the gift bag tighter, its rope handles cutting slightly into my palm, using the minor discomfort as an anchor to the present moment. My analytical mind, the same one that had served me so well in law school and in my career before I'd switched to part-time consulting, began offering logical explanations. Maybe Marcus had just left. Maybe the car had been there for hours and he was long gone. Maybe I was being paranoid, reading sinister meaning into a perfectly innocent coincidence. But something deeper, something that lived below conscious thought, kept me rooted to that spot. The fluorescent parking garage lights hummed overhead, creating stark pools of yellow-white illumination that made everything look slightly surreal. Shopping carts rattled in the distance, their wheels echoing off concrete. A car engine started somewhere on the level above, the sound reverberating through the structure like thunder. The warmth I'd carried from my coffee stop now felt oppressive, stifling. My skin began to tingle with an unease I couldn't name, and I could feel the day's peace slipping away like water through my fingers. Something deep in my chest whispered that my life was about to shift in ways I wasn't prepared for, that the ground I'd thought was solid was about to reveal itself as quicksand. I started walking again, each step deliberate and careful, as though the concrete beneath my feet had suddenly become fragile. My eyes remained fixed on that car, every familiar detail etching itself more sharply into my vision as I drew closer. The small dent in the rear bumper from a shopping cart incident last Christmas. The parking sticker from Marcus's, Jim barely visible in the rear window. The way the car sat slightly low on the left side because he'd been meaning to check the tire pressure for weeks. My heartbeat was no longer steady. It had become wild, uncontained, like it already understood something my conscious mind was still refusing to accept. I wanted desperately to believe this was nothing, that I'd laugh at myself later for overthinking, for letting my imagination run away with me. But with each step closer, the shadow of dread grew longer, darker, more substantial. The mall's lights spilled into the parking garage through the open sides, catching the glossy paint of Marcus's BMW and making it gleam like black ice. I stopped about 30 feet away, close enough to confirm beyond any doubt that it was his car, far enough to remain hidden behind a concrete pillar. My throat tightened as if someone had wrapped their hands around my neck. The easy melody of Blue Moon died in my chest, replaced by a silence so complete it felt like the world had stopped breathing. The gift bag suddenly felt absurdly heavy in my hand, its cheerful tissue paper and careful wrapping now seeming naive, almost childish. A birthday present for my mother, selected with such care and love, suddenly appeared microscopic against the storm that was beginning to build inside my chest. I stood there, frozen between the ordinary day I'd been living and whatever revelation was about to shatter it. My stomach twisted with that sick feeling you get when you're about to learn something you can't unknow, when you're standing on the precipice of a before and after moment. Every instinct I possessed screamed at me to turn around, to walk away, to preserve the illusion for just a little longer. But I couldn't move. Something beyond curiosity, something that felt almost like destiny, kept me anchored to that spot. As I lingered there in the shadows, heart hammering against my ribs, I didn't yet understand just how accurately that sense of impending doom would prove to be. The driver's door opened with the familiar soft click I'd heard thousands of times over our 12 years of marriage. For a split second, my brain made one last desperate attempt to convince me to look away, to turn and leave before whatever truth was about to spill out could take root in my reality. But my eyes remained locked on the figure emerging from the car, as if controlled by some force beyond my will. It was Marcus, unmistakably him, the way he ran his hand through his salt and pepper hair, the particular way he adjusted his tie even when he was off work, the confident posture that had attracted me to him at that law school mixer 15 years ago. My husband, the man who had kissed me goodbye that morning with what seemed like genuine affection, who had told me over his coffee and newspaper that he'd be working late again, buried under depositions and client calls until at least 10 o'clock. My chest tightened so suddenly and completely that for a moment I wondered if I was having a heart attack. The air seemed to thicken, making each breath a conscious effort. And then, as if the universe was determined to be absolutely, brutally clear about what I was witnessing, she appeared. A woman slid out of the passenger seat with fluid grace, laughing softly as she adjusted the strap of her emerald green dress. A dress that probably cost more than my mortgage payment, I noted with the strange clarity that sometimes comes in moments of shock. The sound of her laughter carried across the parking garage, light and musical, like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. It was the kind of laugh that spoke of shared intimacy, of private jokes and comfortable familiarity. I felt my stomach drop as if the concrete floor had suddenly given way beneath me, sending me plummeting into some dark void. She leaned closer to Marcus, her hand brushing against his sleeve with the casual possessiveness of someone who had done it hundreds of times before. The gesture was so natural, so unconsciously intimate, that it hit me harder than any passionate embrace could have. This wasn't an affair, this was a relationship. Before my mind could fully process what I was seeing, Marcus bent down and kissed her. Not the desperate, stolen kiss of guilty lovers, but something quick, casual, utterly familiar. The kind of kiss shared by people who kissed every day, who didn't need to think about it, who had moved beyond passion into the comfortable territory of established intimacy. My entire body went cold, as if ice water had been injected directly into my veins. The parking garage around me seemed to fade at the edges, like an old photograph left too long in sunlight. I wanted to scream, to run, to wake up from what had to be a nightmare, but my body had turned to stone. Instead, I pressed myself further behind the concrete pillar, clutching the gift bag like a talisman against the horror unfolding in front of me. Every instinct screamed that nothing would ever be the same again. The life I'd built, the marriage I'd trusted, the future I'd planned, all of it was cracking apart like thin ice, and I was powerless to stop it. I crouched lower behind the pillar, my heart pounding so loudly I was certain it would give me away. They walked together toward the mall's exit, still laughing, completely oblivious to the fact that Marcus's wife was watching their every move from just 50 feet away. I studied them with the horrified fascination of someone witnessing a car accident, unable to look away despite the pain. The ease in Marcus's body language was what destroyed me. The way his hand settled naturally on the small of her back, guiding her through the scattered shopping carts with the protective instinct of a long-term partner. That simple gesture, so automatic, so unconscious, gutted me more completely than their kiss had. It spoke of months, maybe years of practiced intimacy. This wasn't a recent mistake or a moment of weakness. This was a parallel life he'd been living, while I made dinner reservations for two, and worried about whether he was eating enough during his long days at the office. My hands shook as I pulled my iPhone from my purse, the rose gold case slippery with the sweat from my palms. For a moment I hesitated, asking myself if I really wanted concrete proof of what my eyes had already confirmed. But then a surge of clarity cut through the emotional chaos. This wasn't about doubt anymore. This was about survival. This was about making sure I never had to rely on memory alone, never had to question whether I'd really seen what I thought I'd seen. I lifted the phone and began taking pictures, the camera's soft click masked by the ambient noise of the parking garage. Each photo felt like a betrayal being carved into digital stone. The way she touched his arm, the intimate space between their bodies as they walked, the natural synchronization of their steps. I captured every cruel detail with the methodical precision I'd once applied to legal research. My chest felt like it was caught in a vice, my breathing shallow and rapid, but I kept taking pictures until I was certain I had enough. Enough for what, I wasn't entirely sure yet, but I knew with absolute certainty that I would need proof of this moment. Not for anyone else, for me. For the days ahead when Marcus would undoubtedly try to gaslight me, to make me question my own sanity, to convince me that what I'd seen wasn't real. I didn't want a confrontation. Not here, not now, not in a public parking garage where other shoppers might witness my humiliation. I wanted something more strategic, more permanent. I wanted justice served cold and calculated, in my own time and on my own terms. As I lowered my phone, pressing it against my chest like it contained my heart itself, Marcus's laugh echoed through the concrete structure one more time. That sound, once so familiar and comforting, now felt like acid being poured directly onto an open wound. His laughter used to be the soundtrack to our happiest moments, lazy Sunday mornings, anniversary dinners, the quiet intimacy of shared jokes. Now it was poisoned, every note of it sharp and merciless. For several long moments, I remained crouched behind the pillar, paralyzed by the magnitude of what had just been revealed. The parking garage around me blurred into meaninglessness, headlights sweeping past, other shoppers loading their cars, the ordinary sounds of evening commerce. None of it registered. All I could feel was the weight of betrayal settling into my bones like lead, heavy and permanent. My marriage, my trust, my sense of security, everything I'd built my identity around for the past 12 years, had cracked apart in the space of a single heartbeat. I was no longer the same woman who had walked into Westfield Shopping Center that afternoon with nothing more pressing on her mind than finding the perfect birthday gift. But instead of collapsing under the weight of this revelation, something unexpected began to happen. Instead of crumbling, I felt my spine straighten. Instead of tears, I felt a cold, clear anger crystallizing in my chest. If Marcus thought this betrayal would destroy me, he didn't know me as well as he believed he did. I would not give him the satisfaction of seeing me broken. Not tonight, not ever. Standing slowly, I brushed concrete dust from my knees and adjusted my purse strap with deliberate care. The photos on my phone felt like weapons waiting to be deployed, and I knew with crystal clarity that my silence would be the sharpest blade of all. Marcus had no idea what he'd just unleashed. As I walked toward my own car, each step steady and purposeful, I began to plan. This betrayal would not go unanswered, but it would be answered on my terms, in my time, in a way that would ensure Marcus never forgot the cost of his deception. When I walked through the front door of our Bellevue home that evening, Marcus was already there, settled into his usual spot on the leather sectional with his laptop balanced on his knees and a glass of his favorite Cabernet on the side table. He looked up as I entered, his face brightening with what appeared to be genuine pleasure at seeing me. The ease of his smile, the warmth in his voice when he greeted me, it all felt like an elaborate theatrical performance now that I knew what lay beneath it. "There's my beautiful wife," he said, closing the laptop and setting it aside with a show of attention that once would have made me feel cherished. "How was your afternoon? Find anything good for your mom?" I forced what I hoped was a natural smile, setting Alina's gift bag on the mahogany console table we'd picked out together during happier times. "I found the perfect scarf at Nordstrom. You know how she loves burgundy. She'll adore it. You always know exactly what people need." He patted the cushion beside him. "Come sit with me. I feel like I haven't seen you all week." The irony was almost too much to bear. Here was my husband of 12 years, the man who had promised to forsake all others, telling me he missed me while still carrying the scent of another woman's perfume on his shirt. But I sat down beside him, close enough that our knees touched, and nodded when he asked about my day. "Long day at the firm?" I asked, my voice steady despite the storm raging in my chest. Marcus launched into what I now recognized as a carefully rehearsed performance. He talked about difficult clients, impossible deadlines, partner meetings that ran late. He mentioned names I'd heard before, other lawyers, judges, paralegals, weaving them into a narrative designed to account for every hour he'd been away from home. I listened, nodding at appropriate intervals, even asking follow-up questions that encouraged him to elaborate on his fiction. But every word that left his mouth felt like a fresh lie burning the air between us. When he complained about having to grab a sandwich at his desk because he was too busy to leave the office, I thought about the intimate dinner he'd clearly shared with her. When he rubbed his temples and talked about the stress of his caseload, I remembered the relaxed way he'd walked beside her, his hand on her back. We sat down for dinner, grilled salmon and quinoa salad that I'd prepared that morning before work, back when I still believed I was married to a faithful man. Marcus complimented the meal, asked about my own work, shared an amusing story about a junior associate's mistake. To any observer, we would have looked like a successful, comfortable couple enjoying another quiet evening at home. But I found myself studying him with new eyes, cataloging details I'd previously overlooked or dismissed. The way his gaze darted away from mine when I asked specific questions about his day. The slight pause before certain answers, as if he was checking his story for consistency. The phone he kept face down on the table, when he usually left it face up out of habit. My hands remained steady as I cut my salmon, my voice calm as I responded to his questions. Inside, though, I was unraveling thread by thread, each lie adding another layer of betrayal to the growing mountain of deception between us. The remarkable thing was how good he was at this, how practiced his performance had become. This wasn't the stumbling deception of a guilty husband caught in his first affair. This was the smooth, confident lying of someone who'd been living a double life for a very long time. As we cleared the dishes together, another domestic ritual that now felt like elaborate theater, I matched his performance with my own. I gave him no reason to suspect that anything had changed, that I knew, that I had seen, that I possessed proof of his betrayal. My silence became my armor, and Marcus had no idea how dangerous that truly was. That night, as he showered before bed, I could hear him humming, "The Way You Look Tonight," through the bathroom door. It was a song he used to sing to me during our early dating years, when he would pull me into slow dances in our tiny apartment kitchen. Now the melody sounded like a mockery, like he was humming the soundtrack to a life he was systematically destroying. I lay in our king-sized bed, staring at the ceiling and listening to the familiar sounds of his nighttime routine. The electric toothbrush, the water running, the medicine cabinet opening and closing. Sounds that had provided comfort and continuity for over a decade, now serving as audio confirmation that the man I'd trusted with my heart was capable of looking me in the eye and lying with breathtaking ease. When Marcus slipped into bed beside me, he reached for me with the automatic affection of long marriage, his arm settling around my waist in a gesture that once made me feel safe and loved. Now his touch felt like a violation, like being embraced by a stranger wearing my husband's face. "I love you, Claire," he whispered against my hair, his voice carrying what sounded like sincere emotion. "I love you too," I whispered back, the lie tasting like ash in my mouth. But even as I spoke those words, I was already planning. Already thinking ahead to the moment when I would finally let him know that his performance had failed, that his audience had seen through the elaborate show. My silence wasn't weakness, it was strategy. And Marcus had no idea that his days of living this double life were numbered. The next morning, while Marcus showered and prepared for another day of impossible deadlines and difficult clients, I conducted my first systematic search of our home. My hands shook slightly as I went through the pockets of his jackets hanging in our walk-in closet, but my resolve never wavered. I found exactly what I expected to find: the breadcrumbs of a secret life he thought he'd hidden perfectly. There was a receipt from Chez Laurent, the most expensive French restaurant in downtown Seattle, dated from 2 weeks ago, the same night he'd told me he was working late on a brief. The bill was for 2 people, with 2 glasses of champagne and what appeared to be a celebration dinner. I photographed it carefully before returning it to exactly the same position in his jacket pocket. A valet parking stub from the Four Seasons Hotel. A receipt from Tiffany & Co. for a purchase I'd never received, $3, $200 for what the itemized slip identified as platinum tennis bracelet. Each piece of paper was another thread in the tapestry of deception he'd been weaving, and together they painted a picture of a man who was not only cheating, but doing so with considerable expense and care. I tucked each item back exactly where I'd found it, photographed with my phone for my growing collection of evidence. My heart pounded throughout the search, but my face would wear only calm when Marcus emerged from the bathroom, humming and oblivious to the fact that his carefully constructed house of lies was beginning to crumble. At work that day, I found it almost impossible to concentrate on the trademark dispute I was supposed to be researching. Instead, I kept replaying the parking garage scene in my mind like a cruel film that started over every time I tried to focus on something else. Each time I closed my eyes, I saw the kiss, the way she touched him, the ease in his laugh as they walked together toward the mall entrance. But instead of letting the images spiral me into despair, I began to use them as fuel. During my lunch break, I drove to a Kinko's across town and opened a new email account under a false name. I uploaded the photos from the parking garage to cloud storage, creating backups of backups. If Marcus thought he could gaslight me, manipulate me, or make me question my own sanity, he was about to learn how thoroughly he'd underestimated the woman he'd married. I started keeping a detailed log of his movements, his excuses, his phone habits. When he claimed to be at the office, I would sometimes drive by his building, noting whether his car was actually in the parking garage. When he said he was meeting clients for dinner, I paid attention to what he ordered for takeout on the nights he came home claiming to have grabbed a quick bite. The pattern that emerged was damning in its consistency. Marcus wasn't just having an affair, he was living an entirely separate life, complete with romantic dinners, weekend getaways, cleverly disguised as work trips, and what appeared to be a level of emotional and financial investment that went far beyond casual cheating. By the end of that first week of investigation, I had compiled a folder of evidence that would have impressed my old law school professors. Photos, receipts, documented inconsistencies in his stories, even a few audio recordings I'd made on my phone when he called to explain why he'd be home late. I wasn't building a case for divorce court. I was building a case for something much more personal and devastating. Every evening, I would return home to find Marcus already there, or he would arrive shortly after with another elaborate story about his day. He would kiss my cheek with what seemed like genuine affection, ask about my work, share details about his cases that I now knew were largely fictional. We would eat dinner together, watch Netflix, go through all the comfortable routines of a long marriage. But underneath the domestic tranquility, I was conducting psychological warfare. I would casually mention restaurants I knew he'd visited with her, watching for tells in his expression. I would ask pointed questions about his work schedule, noting the micro-expressions that flickered across his face when he was forced to lie directly to my face. I became a student of my husband's deception, learning to read the subtle signs of his dishonesty with forensic precision. The most remarkable thing was how completely unaware he remained of the trap forming around him. Marcus was so confident in his ability to compartmentalize, so secure in his belief that I was the naive, trusting wife who accepted his explanations without question, that he never noticed how carefully I was watching, how systematically I was documenting, how strategically I was preparing for the reckoning to come. At night, I would lie beside him listening to his steady breathing, wondering how many times he had come home from her arms and slipped into bed next to me. The thought was like acid in my veins, but I didn't let it consume me. Instead, I stored it like firewood, fuel for when the time came to burn his entire world down. My silence was no longer the silence of ignorance or denial. It was the silence of strategy, of patience, of a predator waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Marcus had taught me, through his betrayal, that marriage could be a performance. Now I was going to show him just how skilled a performer I could be. And soon, very soon, I would decide exactly when and how to bring the curtain down on his elaborate show. 3 weeks into my investigation, I made a discovery that changed everything. While Marcus was supposedly at a weekend conference in Portland, I decided to visit his office to drop off some documents he'd claimed to have forgotten. The security guard, someone I'd chatted with dozens of times over the years, gave me a puzzled look when I asked if Marcus was upstairs. "Mr. Richardson? He hasn't been in the office all weekend, Mrs. Richardson. In fact, I don't think I've seen him here past 6 o'clock in weeks. Most of the lawyers have been leaving earlier lately, some kind of new work-life balance initiative from the managing partners." The ground shifted beneath my feet. Not only was Marcus lying about working late, but his entire law firm had apparently embraced earlier hours. Every late night, every weekend conference, every client dinner that kept him out until midnight, all of it was fiction, carefully constructed to give him time with her. That afternoon, I did something I'd never imagined myself capable of. I hired a private investigator. Margaret Chen came highly recommended from a friend who'd gone through a particularly nasty divorce the year before. She was a former police detective, mid-50s, with still gray hair, and the kind of steady competence that immediately put me at ease. We met at a coffee shop in Kirkland, far from anywhere Marcus and I usually spent time. "I need to know everything," I told her, sliding a folder across the table. "Where they go, how often they meet, how long this has been going on. I need to understand the full scope of what I'm dealing with." Margaret flipped through my carefully documented evidence with professional appreciation. "You've done excellent work already," she said. "Most people come to me with nothing but suspicions. You've built a solid foundation." "I need more than foundations," I replied. "I need blueprints. I need to know exactly what I'm tearing down." Within a week, Margaret had provided me with information that was both more extensive and more devastating than I'd expected. The woman's name was Sophia Morrow. She was 34, a marketing executive at a tech company, divorced for 3 years. She lived in a luxury condo in Belltown, drove a white Tesla, and had apparently been seeing my husband for 8 months. 8 months, while I was planning our anniversary celebration, Marcus was falling in love with someone else. While I was researching weekend getaways for us, he was booking romantic trips with her. While I was working part-time to spend more time with him, he was using that time to build an entirely separate life. But Margaret's investigation revealed something even more devastating. This wasn't Marcus's first affair. There had been others, smaller and shorter, stretching back at least 3 years. What I had discovered wasn't the exception, it was the pattern. My husband was a serial cheater, and I had been the oblivious wife enabling his behavior by being so trusting, so supportive, so willing to believe his explanations. The worst part was how systematic it all was. Marcus had separate credit cards I didn't know about, a second phone he kept in his office, even what appeared to be a safety deposit box where he stored gifts and mementos from his affairs. This wasn't the impulsive mistake of a man having a midlife crisis. This was the calculated deception of someone who had turned infidelity into a carefully managed system. Margaret's photographs showed them at restaurants, walking hand in hand through Pike Place Market, kissing on the balcony of her Belltown condo. But the image that broke something fundamental inside me was the one taken at Green Lake Park on a sunny Saturday afternoon. Marcus was pushing a young girl on the swings while Sophia watched with obvious affection. The girl appeared to be about 6 or 7, with dark curls and her mother's smile. Marcus was playing stepfather to another woman's child while telling me that he wasn't ready for children yet, that his career was too demanding, that we should wait a few more years before starting a family. He was living the domestic life I'd been begging for, just not with me. That night, I sat in my car outside our house for 20 minutes before going inside, staring at the photographs on my phone and trying to process the magnitude of his betrayal. This wasn't just adultery, it was the theft of years of my life, the destruction of every plan we'd made together, the obliteration of every future I'd imagined. When I finally walked through our front door, Marcus was in the kitchen making dinner, still humming that same jazz standard. He looked up with a smile that I now recognized as completely artificial. "Perfect timing," he said. "I thought we'd try that new pasta recipe you bookmarked." I watched him move around our kitchen with the ease of someone who believed his performance was still working, who had no idea that the audience had not only seen through his act, but had been taking detailed notes for weeks. The cognitive dissonance was staggering. This man, who was capable of such elaborate emotional and financial investment in another relationship, who could play house with another woman's child while denying me the family I desperately wanted, standing in our kitchen talking about pasta recipes as if nothing had changed. But everything had changed. I was no longer the woman who had walked into Westfield Shopping Center looking for a birthday gift for her mother. I was no longer the trusting wife who accepted his explanations without question. I was someone new, someone harder, smarter, and infinitely more dangerous than Marcus had ever imagined. As we cooked dinner together, I began to formulate the final phase of my plan. The evidence gathering was complete. The investigation had revealed the full scope of his deception. Now it was time to decide how to use that information most effectively. Marcus wanted to live a double life. I was going to make sure he understood the true cost of that choice, and I was going to make sure that lesson was delivered in the most public, humiliating, and permanent way possible. The idea came to me on a Tuesday morning in early November, crystallizing with such clarity that I wondered why I hadn't thought of it immediately. I was drinking coffee in our kitchen, watching Marcus read the morning news on his iPad, when he made a casual comment about how long it had been since we'd entertained. "Remember how much fun we used to have with dinner parties?" he said, not looking up from his screen. "We should do that again sometime. Maybe invite my parents, some people from the firm." The irony was exquisite. Here was Marcus, suggesting that we host the very people whose approval and respect mattered most to him, completely unaware that I was going to use that suggestion to destroy him. "That's a wonderful idea," I replied, my voice carefully modulated to convey enthusiasm without appearing too eager. "What about Thanksgiving weekend? We could make it special." Marcus's face lit up with genuine pleasure. He thought this was me recommitting to our marriage, me taking steps to strengthen our social connections and domestic life. In reality, I was selecting the stage for his downfall with the same care I'd once used to plan surprise birthday parties. Over the following weeks, I threw myself into party planning with an enthusiasm that Marcus interpreted as renewed domestic bliss. I researched menus, selected wines, planned decorations. But every decision was made with a dual purpose: to create the perfect evening for our guests while ensuring the perfect setting for Marcus's humiliation. I invited his parents, George and Patricia Richardson, who had always been somewhat formal with me but who clearly adored their successful lawyer son. I included his law partner, James, and James's wife, along with Marcus's closest friend from law school, David, and his new girlfriend. I even invited my own parents and my sister Sarah, people who had watched Marcus charm his way into our family and who still believed he was the devoted husband he pretended to be. The guest list was carefully curated to include everyone whose opinion mattered to Marcus professionally and personally. These were the people he performed for, the audience for his successful, respectable life. They were going to be the witnesses to his exposure. As the date approached, Marcus threw himself into preparation with touching enthusiasm. He selected wines from his collection, helped plan the menu, even bought a new shirt for the occasion. He kept commenting on how happy he was that we were reconnecting and investing in our social life together. The night before the dinner party, as I was arranging flowers in our dining room, Marcus came up behind me and wrapped his arms around my waist. "This feels like old times," he murmured against my hair, "like when we were first married and everything felt possible." I leaned back against him, allowing myself to feel, for just a moment, the ghost of what we'd once had. There had been a time when Marcus's arms felt like home, when his voice whispering in my ear was the most comforting sound in the world. But that man, if he had ever truly existed, was gone, replaced by this masterful actor who could speak of love while systematically destroying everything we'd built together. "Yes," I whispered back, "it feels like a new beginning." And in a way it was, just not the kind he was imagining. The morning of the dinner party dawned crisp and clear, one of those perfect Seattle autumn days where the air smells like wood smoke and possibility. I spent the day in careful preparation, moving through our house like a choreographer, setting the stage for the most important performance of my life. I set the dining room table with our wedding china, the Waterford crystal pattern we'd registered for 12 years ago, when we still believed in forever. The ivory tablecloth was pressed to perfection, the silver candlesticks polished until they gleamed. Everything looked elegant, festive, celebratory. The perfect setting for what Marcus believed would be an evening of domestic triumph. In the kitchen, I prepared Marcus's favorite menu: herb-crusted lamb with rosemary potatoes, the green salad with pomegranate vinaigrette that had been his mother's recipe, and the chocolate tart I'd learned to make during our second year of marriage. Each dish was prepared with meticulous care, seasoned with 13 years of accumulated knowledge about what would make him happiest. But while my hands moved through the familiar motions of cooking and arranging, my mind was focused on the laptop I'd hidden in the study, loaded with the slideshow that would end Marcus's performance forever. Every photograph had been carefully selected and arranged to tell the story of his deception in the most devastating way possible. The images from the parking garage were there, of course, but Margaret's investigation had provided so much more. Restaurant receipts, hotel records, photographs of Marcus and Sophia at locations he'd claimed to have never visited, even screenshots of text messages between them that painted a picture of a fully realized emotional and physical relationship. The final slide was a photograph Margaret had taken just the previous weekend. Marcus, Sophia, and her daughter at the Woodland Park Zoo, looking for all the world like a happy family. Marcus was carrying the little girl on his shoulders while Sophia walked beside them, her hand resting possessively on his arm. They were all smiling, relaxed, completely absorbed in their own private world. It was the kind of photograph I'd dreamed of taking with Marcus and our own children someday. Instead, it would serve as the final, irrefutable proof that he had been living the life I wanted, just not with me. By 5 o'clock, everything was ready. The house looked perfect, warm and welcoming in the golden afternoon light. The smell of roasting lamb filled the air. Wine was breathing on the sideboard. I had even taken extra care with my appearance, choosing a deep blue dress that Marcus had always complimented and styling my hair the way he'd always said he loved best. I wanted to look beautiful when I destroyed him. I wanted him to remember, years from now, how lovely his wife had looked on the night she ended his world. The guests began arriving at 6, each entrance carefully orchestrated in my mind. Marcus's parents came first, Patricia elegant in her usual understated way, George booming with the kind of confident bonhomie that Marcus had inherited. They embraced their son with obvious pride, commenting on how wonderful the house looked and how lucky he was to have such a devoted wife. "Claire has outdone herself," Patricia said, admiring the flower arrangements. "Marcus, you don't deserve her." If only she knew how prophetic that statement was. James and his wife Linda arrived next, followed by David and his girlfriend Michelle, a young paralegal from another firm who clearly idolized Marcus's success. My own family rounded out the group: my parents, who had always been cautiously supportive of my marriage, and my sister Sarah, who had confided to me just last month how much she envied the stability of my relationship with Marcus. As we gathered in the living room for cocktails, I watched Marcus work the room with the practiced charm that had made him so successful as a lawyer. He told amusing anecdotes about recent cases, asked thoughtful questions about everyone's work and families, played the role of gracious host with Academy Award-worthy skill. Several times, I caught him looking at me with what appeared to be genuine affection and gratitude, as if this evening was confirming for him what a good life we'd built together. The cognitive dissonance was breathtaking. Here was a man who had been living a double life for years, who had been systematically lying to every person in this room, who had been building a future with another woman while maintaining the facade of devoted husband, and yet he seemed genuinely moved by the warmth and affection surrounding him. During dinner, the conversation flowed easily around topics I'd carefully orchestrated: mutual friends, shared memories, plans for the holidays. Marcus was in his element, charming and engaged, occasionally reaching over to squeeze my hand or make some small joke that included me in the warmth of his performance. To everyone watching, we looked like a couple celebrating not just an evening, but a life well lived together. George raised his glass at one point to toast my son and his beautiful wife, who remind us all what a strong marriage looks like. The irony was so sharp it was almost funny. Patricia nodded in agreement, adding that she hoped she and George would be as happy as we were after 12 years of marriage. I smiled and accepted their compliments gracefully, all while knowing that in less than an hour, their son's marriage would be over, and their opinion of him would be forever altered. After dinner, as I served coffee and dessert, I caught Marcus's eye and suggested we share some photos from recent trips and special occasions. I put together a little slideshow, I said casually. I thought it would be fun to look back at some happy memories. Marcus's face lit up with pleasure. He had always loved being the center of positive attention, and the idea of a photographic retrospective of our relationship clearly appealed to him. "What a wonderful idea," he said, moving to help me set up the laptop and projector I'd prepared in the living room. As our guests settled into chairs with their coffee and dessert, Marcus dimmed the lights and took his place beside me, his arm settling around my shoulders in a gesture of comfortable intimacy. He had no idea he was positioning himself for the most public humiliation of his life. The slideshow began innocently enough, exactly as I'd planned. Photos from our early years together, law school graduation, our wedding, honeymoon pictures from Italy, Christmases with family. Everyone smiled and made appreciative comments. Patricia wiped away a tear at a photo of Marcus and me dancing at our wedding reception. George chuckled at a picture of his son attempting to assemble a bookshelf in our first apartment. "Look how young you both were," Sarah said softly. "You can see how much in love you were." Marcus squeezed my shoulder, leaning down to whisper, "We still are." The photos continued: anniversaries, vacations, family gatherings, holiday celebrations. A decade of documented happiness, carefully curated to show Marcus at his most devoted, most charming, most worthy of love and respect. I felt him relaxing beside me, settling into the warm glow of nostalgia and appreciation. And then, with one click of the remote, everything changed. The screen filled with the photograph from the parking garage. Marcus kissing Sophia beside his BMW, their intimacy undeniable in the harsh fluorescent lighting. The gasp that went up from the room was audible, a collective intake of breath that seemed to suck all the oxygen from the space. But I didn't stop there. The next slide showed a receipt from Shay Laurent, clearly marked with the date Marcus had claimed to be working late. Then a photo of Marcus and Sophia at Pike Place Market, her hand in his. Then the hotel receipt from the Four Seasons. Then the Tiffany receipt for the bracelet I'd never received. Each image appeared on screen for exactly 10 seconds, long enough to be fully absorbed, short enough to maintain the relentless pace of revelation. I had choreographed this exposure with the same precision I'd once applied to legal briefs, ensuring maximum impact with no opportunity for Marcus to interrupt or deflect. The silence in the room was absolute. Patricia's hand had moved to cover her mouth. George's face had gone ashen. James was staring at his longtime partner with obvious shock. My own parents looked stricken, while Sarah's eyes had filled with tears of sympathy for what I was going through. Marcus had gone completely rigid beside me, his arm dropping from my shoulders as if he'd been burned. I could feel the heat radiating from his body, could hear his breathing become rapid and shallow. But I wasn't done yet. The final photograph appeared on screen: Marcus, Sophia, and her daughter at the zoo, looking like the perfect family. This image lingered longer than the others, giving everyone time to absorb not just the fact of Marcus's infidelity, but the depth of his emotional investment in this other life. Finally, I stood and faced our guests, my voice calm and clear in the suffocating silence. "I thought you should all know who Marcus really is," I said simply. "For months, he's been telling me he was working late, attending conferences, meeting with clients. But as you can see, he's been living an entirely different life." Marcus tried to speak then, his voice cracking as he began some desperate attempt at explanation. But I held up my hand, and something in my expression stopped him cold. "I've been documenting this for weeks," I continued. "Every lie, every deception, every moment he chose to invest in building a future with someone else while pretending to build one with me." I reached into the side table and pulled out a manila envelope, placing it on the coffee table where everyone could see it. "These are divorce papers. I've already moved my things out of the house. I've already consulted with an attorney. This marriage is over." The room erupted then. Patricia began crying openly, while George stared at his son with undisguised disgust. James was shaking his head in disbelief, clearly calculating the professional implications of his law partner's spectacular personal failure. My own family members were looking between Marcus and me, with expressions ranging from shock to sympathy to barely contained anger. But through it all, I remained calm. This wasn't about emotion anymore, it was about justice. It was about ensuring that Marcus faced consequences not just for his betrayal of me, but for his systematic deception of everyone who had trusted and respected him. Marcus tried several times to regain control of the situation, to offer explanations or apologies that might salvage something from the wreckage. But every attempt was met with the cold silence of people who had just watched their opinion of him fundamentally alter in real time. "Claire, please," he finally said, his voice breaking. "We can talk about this privately. This doesn't need to." "Actually, it does need to be exactly this public," I interrupted. "Because your betrayal wasn't just of me. It was of everyone in this room who believed in you, who trusted you, who thought they knew who you were." I looked around at our guests, these people who had shared our table and our lives for years. "You all deserve to know the truth about the man you've been supporting and celebrating. And I deserve to have witnesses to his response when finally confronted with the consequences of his choices." Patricia stood then, her face streaked with tears, and walked over to embrace me. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry he did this to you." One by one, the others followed suit. My parents, my sister, even James, they all made a point of expressing their support for me and their disappointment in Marcus. In the space of 30 minutes, he had gone from beloved son, respected partner, and admired friend to a man who had lost the trust and respect of everyone who mattered to him. As the evening wound down and guests began to leave, each departure felt like another nail in the coffin of Marcus's social and professional reputation. George barely looked at his son as he helped Patricia with her coat. James mumbled something about needing to discuss the implications for the firm before practically fleeing with Linda. David, who had idolized Marcus since law school, left without saying goodbye at all. Finally, it was just Marcus and me, standing in the ruins of the life he had systematically destroyed through his deceptions. The beautiful dinner party setting, the wedding china, the polished silver, the carefully arranged flowers, now looked like the remnants of a funeral for our marriage. Marcus sank into one of the dining room chairs, his head in his hands. "Claire," he said, his voice barely audible, "I never meant for any of this to happen." I remained standing, looking down at this man who had once been the center of my world and was now a stranger who had stolen years of my life. "Yes, you did," I said quietly. "Every choice you made, every lie you told, every moment you invested in her instead of us, all of it was intentional. The only thing you didn't mean to happen was getting caught." He looked up at me then, and I saw something I'd never seen in Marcus's eyes before: genuine fear. Not just fear of losing me, but fear of losing everything: his reputation, his career, the respect of everyone who mattered to him. He was finally understanding the true scope of what his betrayal had cost him. "What do you want from me?" he asked. "What can I do to fix this?" I picked up my purse from the sideboard, checking to make sure I had the key to the apartment I'd rented 3 weeks ago, the one Marcus didn't even know existed yet. "There's nothing to fix," I said. "This marriage is over. The papers are on the table, along with the contact information for my attorney. Everything else you need to know is in the folder." As I walked toward the front door of what had been our home for 7 years, Marcus called after me one last time. "Claire, please, don't end it like this. We can work through this. We can go to counseling, we can." I turned back to look at him one final time, this man who had shared my bed and my dreams while systematically destroying everything we'd built together. "You ended it, Marcus. 8 months ago, when you decided to build a life with someone else. I'm just making it official." I walked out into the cool November night, leaving behind the wreckage of 12 years of marriage and the smoking ruins of Marcus's carefully constructed double life. As I drove away from our house, his house now, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: complete, absolute peace. The woman who had walked into Westfield Shopping Center looking for a birthday gift for her mother was gone, replaced by someone stronger, smarter, and infinitely more dangerous than Marcus had ever imagined. He had taught me that love could be a lie, that trust could be a weapon used against you, that the person sleeping beside you could be living an entirely separate life. But I had learned those lessons well, and I had used them to ensure that his betrayal would cost him everything he truly valued: his reputation, his relationships, his sense of himself as a man deserving of respect and admiration. As I pulled into the parking garage of my new apartment building, I reflected on the strange justice of it all. Marcus had spent months believing he was living the perfect double life, that he could have both the security of marriage and the excitement of an affair, that he could maintain his respectable public image while pursuing his private desires. Instead, he had lost everything. His marriage was over. His relationship with his parents was probably irreparably damaged. His law partnership would likely survive, but the respect and trust of his colleagues would take years to rebuild, if it ever could be. His friend David would probably never speak to him again. And Sophia, well, Sophia would now know that she'd been dating a man who was not only married but willing to humiliate his wife publicly, rather than handle his affairs with any dignity or discretion. The most fitting punishment of all was that Marcus would have to live with the knowledge that his downfall had been orchestrated by the very woman he'd underestimated so completely. He had seen me as the safe choice, the predictable wife who could be counted on to accept his explanations and trust his word. He never imagined that beneath my calm exterior lay someone capable of patience, strategy, and devastating revenge. But that was exactly who I had always been. Marcus had just never bothered to look closely enough to see it. In my new apartment, a sleek one-bedroom with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Elliott Bay, I opened a bottle of champagne I'd been saving and toasted the end of my old life and the beginning of whatever came next. Tomorrow, there would be lawyers and paperwork, the logistics of untangling a 12-year marriage. There would probably be difficult conversations with friends and family members who had been shocked by the evening's revelations. But tonight, I was simply a woman who had reclaimed her power from someone who had stolen it through deception and betrayal. I had turned Marcus's own tactics against him, using patience and careful planning to ensure that his punishment fit his crime perfectly. The divorce would be finalized within 6 months. Marcus would keep the house but lose half of everything else, including the respect he'd valued more than his marriage. I would start over at 42, older than I'd planned to be when rebuilding my life, but infinitely wiser about the true nature of the human heart. And sometimes, late at night in my new apartment, I would remember the moment when the parking garage photograph first appeared on screen, when Marcus's face went white with shock, and the entire room gasped in unison. I would remember the perfect silence that followed, the way his carefully constructed world cracked apart in the space of a single heartbeat. It was the sound of justice being served, cold and calculating and absolutely final, and it was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard.